and she's a regular media commentator and a host of the popular weekly podcast, Hello Anxiety. Welcome.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you so much. Oh, thanks everyone so much. So you've seen anxiety in action, me running late. I was meant to be here at 6 o'clock. And do you know what I said to myself in the car on the way here? I said, I've got to focus on what I can control, which is driving safely, following my sat nav, not missing a turnoff, and just concentrating. Because when we get anxious, the first thing that happens is that we can't concentrate on what we need to do. And so I am delighted to be here. Leanne and I have been corresponding for months, really, haven't we? And it really is just a joy for me to be here and support all of you. And I know we've got, can I get a bit of an idea as to sort of whether or not you're here with a parenting hat on, sort of like as a parent here this evening? Show of hands. You might be wearing more than one hat. If you're an educator, yes, yeah, okay. And of course, we've got some little ones here as well. So, and maybe there might be some other professionals from other occupations, maybe medical occupations. So welcome. Thank you so much. So anxiety is a challenge, and I don't know whether or not you know much about me, but I live with anxiety. I have since I was really little. And often what happens with these is you just need to do a tiny little click and then it works. Little trick. This is my prep class from 1979. I was 4, and that makes me 48. You don't have to worry about the maths. I don't know whether or not you'll have any luck picking me out. That's little old me there. And of course, this was not a digital photo, so I've had to scan it in, so it's a little bit blurry. When I look back on that time, I was so happy, confident, pretty relaxed, nothing much going on in my life that wasn't pretty great, until I joined a class with 52 other preps, and I had 2 very stressed teachers. So is anyone here a prep teacher or below? We've got some really early, yeah, because we're here to really talk about sort of younger kids, but what I'm going to share with you will apply as your children get older, or if you've got older children as well. So anyone who works with younger children will know that that would be like herding cats every single day. It probably then comes as no surprise. Can you see okay? Probably then comes as no surprise that both of my teachers were really stressed. And there was a lot of tension in the environment that I was being educated in each day. What nobody knew, least of all me at that stage, was that I had the coding in my DNA for anxiety. My mum has an anxiety disorder. Her dad had OCD. Both were undiagnosed. Mum, I speak about mum with full permission. I speak about everyone I speak about with full permission. Even my husband and my daughter. My son doesn't want me to talk about him at all. So because I had that coding, welcome. That's okay, no worries, no problems. Nothing like walking into a room that's full of... It's okay. So I had this coding, and a lot of children who eventually become anxious will have that coding in their DNA. They'll have that genetic predisposition. Around 30 to 50% will be like me. But in the same way, we all have that coding in our muscles or in our muscle cells for growth. Something has to switch that coding on. So we have to do weight training, don't we, to actually switch on that coding to grow larger muscles. It's the same with anxiety. I had the coding, but this was the environment that switched it on for me. And I started to have a really upset tummy. So today, one of the things we're going to talk about are some of the signs and symptoms, because recognizing it early is so powerful. Even if all you do after spending this evening with me here is identify that, yes, there's a need to get a little bit of extra help or a lot, then you can absolutely change the trajectory of a child's life. So I would say to my mum every day, I feel sick. Guess what I would say next? I don't want to go to school. I don't want to go. Because when we feel anxious, we don't want to put ourselves in the environment that makes us feel like that. And of course, thankfully, she said, off you go. You're going every day. Because I didn't look sick, and I didn't have a temperature and I wasn't vomiting, except one day I said I felt sick and I genuinely was, and I threw up all over the kid in front of me, cross-legged on the floor. So that was the one day I did get to go home. But when we avoid because of the feelings of anxiety, that is really what can really make life small and can cause more trouble down the road. So fast forward to year 8 and something terrible happened to my hair. It was the anxiety, I'm sure of it. I do not have an explanation for that. So let's just move on. Despite the smile on my face, I was still living with an undiagnosed anxiety disorder. I would play really high-level netball and I'm a very kind person. It's a really high value for me. I'm a very gentle person, but I'm also really competitive when it comes to sport. And I really wanted to do well. And I would get anxious and I would get panicked. And I was taken to the doctor and diagnosed with asthma. I didn't have asthma. Still, nobody really understood. And I don't know whose dog that is. That is just a random dog in our year 8 class, long before the days of wellbeing dogs. So I stand before you now, many, many years later, and I guess my anxiety has brought me to where I am with you today. I started off as a teacher. I did my Bachelor of Education in Physical Education and Chemistry, a very unusual combination, but it really speaks to my love of science, my love of understanding, and my love of teaching, and of course, my love of health. And so I left teaching when I experienced depression, and going to seek help for my depression was what uncovered a lifelong anxiety disorder. So it took 20 years for my diagnosis. On average in Australia, less so now after COVID, we're more aware, but prior to COVID, it was still taking on average about 8 years for a diagnosis, which is a long time, 18 if you're in a rural area. So recognition, early recognition is really powerful. So this evening, I really want to share with you 4 key takeaways. Okay, there will be more than that, but it's nothing like leaving a seminar such as this around anxiety and going, I feel so anxious and overwhelmed. I don't know where to start. I don't really remember exactly what I'm meant to do now. And so that's why I like to keep it quite simple. Not simple from the point of view of what we'll be talking about necessarily in some cases, but 4 key takeaways that I really want you to walk away with. So let's just start by understanding anxiety. So the definition of anxiety is the brain and the body's response in anticipation of a threat. And whether or not a threat is real, say, for example, somebody quickly swerved in front of you as you were driving, your whole body would go into fight or flight, you'd feel your stomach drop, you'd feel a whole lot of changes. Or maybe you might be thinking about something that you need to do. Maybe next week you need to talk to your peers in a public setting. Nothing like public speaking or public singing, as I've since learned, to create a lot of anxiety. Whether we are experiencing a real threat, we are imagining something that feels threatening, like performing in public or doing an exam or going for a job interview, or we're just perceiving a threatening environment, the brain and the body react exactly the same way. So for little ones who are having trouble separating from mum or dad, they're going into fight or flight. And that's really what happens when we become anxious. And so their brain has detected a threat. Separating from my parent is a threat. And all of their body powers up to keep them safe. And what's safe? Holding onto mum's leg. And so tonight, what we're going to talk about is anxiety in terms of what's actually going on. Why my psychologist would always say to me, Jodi, it's only anxiety. And I just kind of wanted to go, do you really get this stuff? But of course he did. And why I named the podcast, well, Hello Anxiety, because we're going to think about anxiety a bit differently. So I know this is the only slide that has a lot of text, and you don't need to read it. I just want to talk you through. This is something that I've taken from a journal article. The rest of the slides are mostly images because I'm not one for information overload. That's why I really wanted to say that first. What I really wanted to say about this is there are some really normal developmental anxieties for kids. Because what can happen is, as parents, gosh, we just want our kids to be happy and well. And I tell you what, my husband said to me the other day, is it too late to turn back? We've got a 12 and a 14-year-old and they're not always happy and well. And parenting is hard. So is teaching. And it's hard to know sometimes whether or not something that's happening, is it kind of normal? Is this kind of something they'll grow out of? Is this something I need to seek help for? Where do we cross that line? And what can I expect when they're young as they get older? So really what this shows is that through various developmental stages, there are very normal fear and anxiety responses. So a little bubba, a little toddler that doesn't want to separate from a parent, no issue, no question at this stage that this child has separation anxiety. This child is displaying a very normal behaviour. And so we can see really here, in early infancy, they really, not that you'll necessarily know, but within the developing brain, there is a fear of loss. And this happens sort of between sort of 0 and 6 months. There can be that fear of loss. And that's why little babies really love to have a soothing voice and a loving parent not too far away. In late infancy, there can be that shyness with a stranger. This is all completely normal. But if you've got a 12-year-old who's really shy and withdrawn, then that's no longer developmental, of course. In toddlerhood, we can have that separation anxiety, usually between about 1 and 1.5. Lots of fears of thunder and fire and various things that are new that might not be well understood yet. Fear of animals. 4 to 5, fear of death or dead people. And then maybe some phobias between 5 and 7, maybe some fear of natural disasters. And then there are the children like my daughter's friend who will ask her teacher every day, not that we're in a flight path, so I don't even know how she hears the planes, because I've never noticed one, come to think of it. But if there is a plane overhead, she asks, are they coming to bomb the school? Because she is highly anxious and she's making a connection between this sound and what's happening in a very far away place. So one of the things that we can be mindful of as parents and educators when kids are young is what they're being exposed to. Because we can go ahead and watch the news or listen to a news bulletin and we know that where bombs are dropping in areas where there are families, that it's not a risk to our own personal safety here in Australia. Possibly a risk to people that we know and love overseas, but we are not under threat here. And so one of the things to keep in mind is what's the incoming information, and putting yourself in the shoes of a little person who just at a young age doesn't have an understanding of geography. And so they might hear somebody talk about a war and become really quite anxious and feel very threatened. She's also the gorgeous little one that the day that I picked up my copies of the book and I took copies into my kids' schools and handed them to their teachers, she said, what did you do? And I said, I wrote a book. And she said, what's it on? And I said, anxiety. She said, oh, I've got that. Should I take lots of medication for that? So she's a lovely kid, but she's 12, and you can see the difference between kind of what we can see as they're going through developmental stages and where anxiety can lead. Really, the definition between what we call normal anxiety, because it's completely normal, is that normal anxiety rises when you're driving somewhere and you're very late and you don't know if you're going to make it on time, and then falls when you arrive and you're greeted with a beautiful smile and lots of welcoming faces, and you're here and you're able to do what you need to do. That's normal. Anxiety that is a problem is anxiety that really is extreme, is frequent, and is stopping somebody from doing the activities of normal daily life. My daughter's friend, another friend who has a phobia around chickens, that is really not getting in the way of her life. She does not want to be a chicken farmer. So she can pretty much avoid that unless she comes to our house. And we have a very nasty rooster as well. So I get anxious around him too. Again, she's really overwhelmingly anxious about chickens but she doesn't see chickens she doesn't see chickens very often. So that's not something she'd need to get a lot of help with unless she really, really wanted to. It's not going to really stop her from living a full life. So that's kind of a continuum between kind of the high extreme end and the pretty kind of normal anxiety that most of the population, everybody will get every day. We all get a bit anxious. We get anxious and then our nervous system settles back down. So understanding the developmental anxieties. And I don't want to move on without talking about rejection from peers, sort of grade 6 right through high school. What's happening developmentally is that children are moving away from their family as their tribe to their friendship group as their new tribe. And if you think about tribes, the origin of tribes, if you were on the outside, your safety could be at risk. You might not get fed. If you're wounded, you might not get tended to. You might freeze because you're not inside with everyone near the fire. And so rejection and exclusion is extremely painful and can prompt some natural anxieties that are not necessarily a problem, but if they get out of hand to the point where they're getting in the way of, I don't want to go to school, or I don't want to participate, or I can't go on camp, then obviously that's something to seek a little bit of help for. So when you think about your mobile phone, you might not have thought about this, but it's always looking for Wi-Fi. Our phones are always roaming, looking for the next tower. That's how when people have done the wrong thing, they can sometimes be traced back to where they were. Our brains are a bit the same. There's a part of our brain called the amygdala. It's always looking out for either cues or sensory information of safety or danger. There is a part of our brain, it's a sense. It's not a sense that we consciously think about, but it's always looking out, is this safe or is this dangerous? When something is detected as being dangerous, the fight or flight response is triggered and switched on just like that in milliseconds. What happens when we're in fight or flight is that our whole body is powered up to fight for safety because our brain thinks our life is being threatened, or to flee as fast as we can. So when you think of a little person who's really struggling to separate, doesn't want to go to school, which is can be quite a common anxiety for young children, their brain has detected a threat, separating from mum or dad, and these are the things that happen in their body. Their heart races to pump more blood around the body so they can run or fight. Breathing changes. So you might have noticed, if you know someone with anxiety yourself or a young person, sometimes the breathing can be a little bit short and shallow, or can't get that full breath, can't get enough, feel like you can get enough oxygen in. The cooling turns on, we start to perspire because the brain says you are about to fight for your safety or run like heck. And so you're going to get hot. So we sweat. We can get a bit tingly in the arms and legs because of the change in blood flow. And we can get upset tummies because digestion is not needed when your life is in danger. So the blood is moved from the tummy, from the gut, into the arms and legs. So my psychologist used to say it's only anxiety. And what he meant was all of the symptoms of anxiety, the laser focus on the threat, the worry, and everything that happens in the body feels pretty awful. It really feels awful. But you can kind of feel awful and nothing actually happens. I feel a little anxious now because I care about what I'm doing. And if I wasn't a little bit anxious and I was really like what we call arousal was really low, I might be having a little snooze in the corner. And if it was right up and over the other side, I might be so hyped I'm running laps around the auditorium. So we need a certain amount of anxiety to perform, to be motivated, to be engaged, but not too much. So when somebody has an anxiety disorder like me, that little part of the brain that detects threat is a bit sensitive. Does anyone here have a smoke alarm that goes off in the house if you burn the toast? Yeah, they're very sensitive, aren't they? So we can think of this part of the brain a bit like the smoke alarm, that the smoke alarm is meant to go off when there is a fire that is threatening to our safety. But if the alarm is going off at little things, it's a little bit sensitive. And that's what happens in the brains of people who live with anxiety, like moi. So I take medication for my anxiety as well. And that has meant I've been able to develop the skills and put the strategies I've learned into practice. Because for a long time, my anxiety was just so high, I couldn't think straight and I couldn't adopt the skills I needed or call on them when I needed them. This prefrontal cortex here at the front of the brain, behind our forehead, this is the part of our brain that is rational thinking, problem solving, decision making, and it's called the executive. You've probably, educators in the room are going, learned all about that. So when anxiety is happening, when anxiety is switched on because the amygdala has detected a threat, we can't waste time with complex functions of the brain like problem solving, rational thinking and decision making. So that part of the brain is unavailable, which explains a lot, because people who are highly anxious, you cannot reason with them. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that when a child is highly, even if they're just emotional, they're not necessarily just anxious, but big emotions? Step one is enable them to feel what they feel, enable that to settle down, and we'll talk about how we can do that. And then problem solving comes later when the prefrontal cortex is back online. Because it would take too long. It would be like a committee meeting of the mind when the mind really is just looking for a quick fight or flight response to keep us safe. So what I'm going to get you to do, I'm going to get you to talk. I know that's going to provoke a little bit of anxiety. I understand that. But one of the great things that we can do for the young people in our lives is notice maybe a little bit of anxiety. Take a breath, because that activates the vagus nerve and helps to settle it down. And always know that we can be anxious and we can still do what's important. Because so many will say to themselves, I'll just do that important thing when I feel relaxed, when I feel confident, when I feel content, when I feel okay, when I don't feel anxious. And that was me for a long time. And if you wait until the anxiety goes, you will be waiting forever, because we can't get rid of it. We wouldn't want to. It's there to keep us safe. So if you're noticing a little bit of anxiety, recognize it, label it, name it to tame it. I'm feeling a little bit anxious about maybe having to have a conversation with someone. That's okay. My mum said, I'm never coming to one of your presentations. That's just the worst thing you can ever ask anybody to do, is to talk in a group if you don't know someone. But I think it's an opportunity to connect and to realize that you all are in this together, because anxiety affects everyone in very similar ways. So I want you to have a chat with the person next to you. Maybe you might need to move and see what you can discuss in terms of the signs and symptoms of anxiety and where they might fit into one of these 4 boxes into this matrix, because these are the 4 ways anxiety shows. So I'll give you one, for example, in terms of sensations, racing heart. Okay. All right. So I'm going to give you just a short period of time just to have a chat with someone, talk about all the signs and symptoms that you have observed in children that you teach, in yourself, in people you know, in your own children. And then I'm going to ask you to share some with me. All right. Okay, go. Thanks, everyone. Thank you. I love that you'd like to keep chatting. I'll give you more time. I'll give you more time a little bit later. Thanks, everyone. So I love to hear that buzz. I love to see people starting to talk about it, because that's what we need to do when it comes to anxiety. And we know that it's being talked about a lot more. We know that in children and adolescents that anxiety globally has doubled, so has depression as a result of COVID. But what we also know, which is good news, is that now that the threat, because of course anxiety is anticipation of a threat, so of course we've been faced with so much threat and of course so much uncertainty, which really drives anxiety as well. A lot of that's settling down, so there are a lot of people and children who are starting to feel less anxious and starting to feel a lot better now that life's sort of getting back to a post-COVID kind of normal. But it is common. And the more we talk about it, the more we realize everyone feels anxiety. It's a normal human emotion. But for some people, it can get out of hand. And the more we talk, the more we learn. And the more we feel less alone, because one of the things about anxiety is that there used to be quite a stigma about it. And that's one of the things I really love to break down, is that I'll tell anyone who asks about my story, because there's a lot of learning to do and there's so much we can do to manage it. So in terms of thoughts, feelings, sensations and behaviour, I wonder if maybe let's start with if anyone could just share with me some of the signs or symptoms, just to, like whether or not you say breathing or racing heart, or what were you discussing? Just to agitated. Okay, so that might be either maybe a sensation or could be a behaviour. Amazing, thank you. Thank you. I always congratulate the first person because it takes a bit of guts to do that. So what else? We're all friends here. Yes. I can't do it. Yes, I can't. Yes, yep. Common.
They've got lots of questions, so I can see their brains racing when they're getting a little bit nervous or anxious about something, but then they're asking me all these big questions about what might happen or what the process is.
Yes. Would you think that might be reassurance seeking?
Yeah.
And also trying to get more predictability about what might happen? Yes, we want control. We don't like it when we don't know what's going on, but we can only focus on what we can control. And when we start to have that mindset, it's really helpful because we realize that it's futile and pointless and a waste of energy to focus on the things that are out of our control. But sometimes we get so swept away in our worrying thoughts that it's hard to kind of stop and be present and think about what can I do here that's in my control. What else? Yes. Yeah, negative thoughts. Did you know what's really interesting is we all have about, it's a big number, 50 to 70,000 thoughts a day. 50 to 70. Most of them are the same and most of them are negative. What am I going to cook for dinner? Oh, my kids are each doing a little bit of a meal here and there now. Thank goodness, it's just so freeing. So it's really interesting to know that we do have a lot of, we have a negativity bias because our brain is looking to keep us safe. That's what's happening. And so we can have negative thoughts and we can have thoughts of I can't or I don't want to, and that's avoidance. And that's because I don't like how I feel in my body when I'm put in this unusual situation. I don't like how I feel. And because I'm not used to being a little bit uncomfortable, I'm going to pull back. I'm not going to do it. And so that's your brain's way of trying to keep you safe. And that's what's happening in the children that you have in your families and in your classrooms. I think it's so powerful to understand it from this point of view of this primitive part of the brain really focusing on life preservation. And so that little person that just can't let go or just will not leave the house, really they're really being driven by a brain that just thinks whatever it is that they have to do is just way too dangerous. And there's ways to help move children forward, which is really important. We'll get to that. So thank you for sharing. So lots of worry, lots and lots of worries. I was the worrywart. That was my nickname when I was a kid, and I sought reassurance from my mum all the time. I'm so worried about this. It's okay. It'll be okay. She just told me it would be okay, and magically I just believed it would be okay until 10 minutes later when something else worried me. And I would just constantly be in this cycle of reassurance seeking. Lots of big feelings with anxiety. Usually anger, that's the fight side of the fight or flight, because the brain's saying, protect yourself. If you can't run away, you have to protect yourself. So there can be anger and there can be that rage that can build and that real fight that you can see in some littlies. And then there can be a lot of tears as well. So we can see big emotions with anxiety. The sensations we talked about before, lots of sensations. In fact, anxiety is really physiological. Because my PhD is in physiology, not in psychology. I have behavioural therapy training as well, and science of wellbeing and happiness training, and lots of education behind me. But anxiety is so physical, and it's often not thought about like that. When you can sit with a little one who says, my tummy doesn't feel good, I feel those butterflies. And through your experience, you know that they don't have a gastro bug. They don't, you know, you can start to see patterns of behaviour. You can say, oh, that's only anxiety. That's your brain. Your brain is telling your body that there might be something that might be either a little bit dangerous or maybe an opportunity. And so giving children that thinking of, well, is this dangerous? Because sometimes there are dangerous things. We want our kids to listen to those feelings. My daughter thinks anybody who drives a white van is somebody to be very wary of. So when she sees a white van, there's something in her brain that says, switch on the anxiety, and that there might be a threat here. And possibly there could be, if your children are older and they're walking home and there's a big group that are kind of coming towards them on the same side, and there's a little something in their brain that says, not sure. It's not always noticeable, it's not always palpable, but just a gut feeling, they might want to cross the road, or they might just want to pop into a shop. So is there a threat or is there an opportunity? That's what we need to think about sometimes when anxiety shows up. The behaviours, when it comes to anxiety, it's avoidance. It's avoidance. I don't want to do it. I don't want to go on camp. I don't want to speak in front of the class. I don't want to go to that friend's house. I don't want to do a sleepover. I don't want to do the test. No matter what age, there's so much of that overwhelming physical feeling that it's uncomfortable. And when you don't know what it is, you want to do whatever it takes to stop feeling that way. But we can feel anxious and our arms and legs still move, and we can do what's important. Speaking about what's important, I got asked a question the other day. I got asked a question by one of my guests on the podcast because she's a world trainer in a branch of behavioural therapy that is absolutely changing lives, and it's called acceptance and commitment therapy. And normally I ask the questions, but she asked me this question and I loved it so much I want to ask you too. Some people absolutely love to collect stamps, and my husband used to collect stamps many, many years ago, not anymore. And I remember my brother did when we were younger as well. So it's something that some people really love. But she said to me, if you never ever had a stamp collection from now to the end of your days, how much anxiety would you feel about that? You could never have a stamp collection on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 being so anxious I can't breathe. How anxious would you be about not having a stamp collection? And I said, I'd be okay. I'd be okay. I've got so much else going on in my life. That's not something that interests me. She said, is there something in your life? Okay, I'm going to ask you the same question. On a scale of 1 to 10, if you could never have a stamp collection, would you feel a great deal of anxiety? Yes or no? Tell me. Most no. Some yes. Last night I did a presentation on Zoom and one person said yes. So it's like everything. Is there something, this was the next question, is there something in your life between now and the end of days that you would love to do, that if you never got to do it, your anxiety would be high? And I said, yes, there's more than one thing that I'd love to do, that if I never got to do it, I would not feel good about that. Is there something that you don't have to tell me what, but is there something that you can think about if you never got to do it, you would feel anxious about that? Yeah. That's because anxiety shows up around the things we really care about. And that is not what we talk about when we talk about anxiety. We think of it as bad, something to get rid of, something to run away from. But anxiety shows up around the things we care about. And so that is something to keep in mind with little people who will grow big, because there will be opportunities. There'll be the opportunity to go for the job at Yo My Goodness down the road, where you can just watch everyone else make beautiful yogurt treats. Or maybe you want to try out for that elite soccer team. Maybe they want to put their hand up for a leadership position in the primary school. They're going to care about those things. So guess what they're going to feel? They're going to feel anxious. And what we want them to do is to go, I feel anxious about this because I care about it. And I know I can feel anxious and I can still do what matters. Really, really important. So, one of the things that I love about beautiful Dr. Christopher McCurry is that he says things like this. Anxiety happens. It's only anxiety, but it's what happens next that is really what matters most. That's what is most important. Don't be afraid of anxiety. Anxiety is going to show up. Big emotions are going to show up. Bless you. Big emotions are going to show up. It's what we do when that's happening and what we do next that really makes a difference for kids. Now, Guy, I didn't ask you if I didn't let you know there's a bit of audio. Should we be all right with that? Okay, we're gonna find out. Let the anxiety build. So, what we're talking about now, we've talked about understanding anxiety. I think we've got a really good, clear understanding of anxiety. There's a brain. We all have a brain. There's an alarm in the brain that will sound the alarm if a threat is detected. Yeah. So when it comes to responding, this is a really big one because this makes a really big difference. Anyone ever felt that was helpful? So Peter and I, my husband and I, have been together for a very long time. We met when we were 19. So next year it'll be 30 years together. Woo! So that's pretty amazing. But he's been on a journey with me. I used to say, and I don't say this anymore, but I used to say that I kind of thought I was an okay catch. And then my mental health went down the toilet and I thought, oh, goodness, poor guy. What's he got himself in for? But we've stayed the course and he's learned a lot. But he says calm down a lot as well. And so a lot of it when you're in a partnership with someone who's highly anxious, it's about education. It's about, well, this helps, this doesn't. And you would not believe that about 2 months ago or so, we were in the car and something happened and he became really anxious all of a sudden. Guess what I said? Couldn't believe I said, and he just looked at me and he's gone, I'm never going to leave. So it's natural. It's natural for us to say things and we don't get it right all the time. We don't. So calm down doesn't help. We kind of all know that. We would if we could, wouldn't we? And for little children, when they're feeling big feelings like anxiety, that's not a helpful response. And we've all used it. We've all done it. But what I like to say is when we know better, we do better. And then we still get it wrong sometimes, and that's okay. That's okay. So there's a different approach. Yes.
Staying out of judgment, not easy. Recognizing emotion in other people. I think of empathy as kind of sacred state where someone's in a deep hole in the bottom of their head and stuff to start. And then you look and you say, hey, I know this like that. And you're not right. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Rarely, if ever, I have it, yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us. It's incredibly painful. And we're trying to still align it. We're trying to put this all align. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversation, if I share something with people, I need to know what's good. What makes something.
She's pretty special, Brene Brown, isn't she? She's so wise. What do you think it takes for us to be able to show that empathy to our children when they're feeling really overwhelmed, big emotions, really anxious? What do you think? I just would like to open a bit of a discussion. What do you think we need for ourselves to be able to do that for them? Yeah, we need to be in a good place ourselves. But what happens? It's so contagious, isn't it? Our kids get upset and it makes us feel upset. So for the little people in the room, when you're upset, it really does affect us because we care so deeply and we want to fix things and we want to make things better, don't we? And so, yeah, that's exactly right. So parenting is so hard. There's so many challenges and there's so many demands, so much to think about, and so much fun and joy and love, of course. But there is a lot of stress in our lives as adults because we're juggling a lot of things. We've got a lot of sort of balls in the air. I said to someone said to me, how are you? I said, I've got a lot of balls in the air, but I'm hoping to catch some tomorrow. That didn't happen. They're still up there. That's all right. And so we need to check in with ourselves because when we are in fight or flight, or when we are feeling sort of edgy or a little bit fragile ourselves, empathy is not going to be something that's going to come naturally to us. And in fact, what comes naturally is jumping into advice and action mode. My poor husband, the other day, so not the other day, it was about 5 weeks ago. I don't want to alarm you because at the time I had COVID and that was a long time ago. It was about 5 weeks ago. My best friend called me. It's about 9:30 at night. I was like, oh, why is she calling me? And she said, her husband, she said, he can't come with me. Would you like to come to the Bahamas with me on Sunday? Right? She was going for work. She'd earned this amazing trip. When do you ever get invited to the Bahamas? Never, ever, ever. And she said, could you clear the decks? If I can change the ticket, could you clear the decks? Could you come with me? Flights paid for, accommodation paid for. I'd have to pay for a few fun things like snorkeling and diving and food and drinks. And that was fine by me, except I said, I would love to, but I've got COVID. And there was no way I was going to test negative on a PCR for international travel. So I said, please don't even wait for me. Let's not even throw the dice. Please invite someone else and I'll just go and cry in a corner. And I got off the phone and Pete goes, why was Christy calling so late? And I told him, and he said, at least we got to go to Eden, which is on the south coast of New South Wales, which is a quaint little fishing town. And the last 2 days of our Eden trip, our daughter vomited because she had COVID first. So our daughter said, sorry, I gave you COVID. So she's feeling bad. I'm like, I probably gave it to you. And he's saying, at least. And he said, at least you'll be out of ISO to go to Hamilton because I had organised some Hamilton tickets with some family. It did not help. It did not make me feel any better, but he was trying because he could see that this was an opportunity to try to fix something. It's so natural because we don't like the distress. But what we all need, we know it when we're not feeling good, is somebody just to say, I can see that this is really hard for you. But it requires us to hold our own stuff as well. The number one thing that we can do as parents and educators when we're in the presence of little people or big people is co-regulate. So when somebody's experiencing high anxiety, big emotions, if we can share our calm, that makes a profound difference to how the next few minutes are going to unfold. So we can only share our calm if we can cultivate that for ourselves. So some of the strategies I'm going to share with you tonight to share with kids are really important for us to use for ourselves as well. Okay. So far we've talked about the brain's alarm and how it's only anxiety. It's just so much in terms of sensations, a focus on the worry, but really and truly that's a very natural response. It's supposed to switch on so we can deal with the situation and then it settles down. But for some people, it's more of an ongoing challenge. And when it's getting in the way of daily life, frequent and extreme, or even if you're not sure, of course, the GP is the place to go to ask the question, and get the ball rolling on maybe a little bit of extra help. And there's so much help available. We know how to respond. How do we respond when anxiety shows up? Sorry, start again. How do we show? Say again. Oh, empathy. It's what we want. You know, when something terrible goes wrong for us, we'd love someone to say, oh, I'm so sorry that happened. Not try to problem solve for us or fix it or tell us what they would have done in the same situation. It's really well-meaning and we've all done it, but we know what we like, and that's what children appreciate as well.
I want to do this. You can't do this now.
Yeah.
You have to emphasize with them, even though you don't have a choice. Sometimes things that have to be done.
Yeah.
Brushing your teeth.
Yep.
Whether you hate it or not, you have to do it.
Yeah.
So I'm causing it.
And then you're empathizing with it. Yeah. One of the beautiful scripts that we can share is to say, oh, you didn't want that to happen. That's not what you hoped for. And empathize in that way to say, I understand this is not what you wanted. And I can understand that you're really disappointed, because we can still, because we have our boundaries and kids need boundaries. And so, like, our daughter was not allowed TikTok for such a long time. She's only 12. She's not really allowed to have it at all. But in her whole friendship circle, and I talk to the parents, so when they say everyone else has got it, this was actually the truth.
Attention please, visitors. The library will be closing in 15 minutes. If you wish to borrow any items or finalise your painting, please do so now.
We were the ones saying no, and she was the one that was devastated. But yeah, we set these boundaries, but we can say, I know how disappointing this is for you. And depending on the age, you may or may not give, we don't need to justify ourselves, but sometimes we do need to explain about why we're making decisions in age appropriate ways. So I hope that that's helpful. Yeah. So overcoming avoidance is a really large part of what we need to do when there are anxious people in our lives. And it's so important, because when we avoid things because of anxiety, it only makes the anxiety worse in the long run. So an example that I've got here is feeling anxious about going to school. Could be for any number of reasons. It could be friendships. It could be a test. It could be separation. It could be just that you just don't like your teacher, or that you've got no one to play with. Lots of anxious thoughts, lots of worries, lots of anxious feelings. And then the brain's like, well, this is threatening. What could I do? All right. Don't go. Ah, that's better. Oh, we feel good now. Which reinforces it, doesn't it? Because, oh, you didn't go, you felt better. It's temporary. It's only temporary. And then, of course, because you didn't go, it's harder to go the next time. If you don't go to the kid's birthday party, and then the kids, you've got a grade 3 and they didn't go to the birthday party because they're socially anxious. Everyone comes to school and is talking about the birthday party. You feel more on the outside and less likely to go the next time. But we don't want to throw kids in the deep end. What we need to do is step them closer. So when there is something that's being avoided, we don't want to support the avoidance. We want to support the courage and the steps towards doing whatever it is that might feel a little bit challenging or a lot challenging. So this is just one example of a step ladder for, and feel free to take photos if you like, or I should have said that at the start, I'm sorry. It's about breaking a big, overwhelming goal down into very small pieces. And you can do that with the child in conjunction with them. You can be a bit creative. I have a friend who has a son who was unable to separate and go to sleepovers. She broke it down in the most creative way, to the point where, and our son is a friend, so sleeping at our house was one of the things that he wanted to do, was that they built a lot of trust. And as he separated and spent time with grandparents and with his dad, they're all together as a family, but sometimes there's one parent they just don't want to separate from. She built up the step ladder so that he would go to a friend's, go to sleep, and once he was asleep, he'd get woken up, picked up and taken home. Pretty full on, huh? But he couldn't go through the whole night. But she was building his confidence and his ability to relax in an environment somewhere away. There was a lot of trust. She was never going to just let him sleep through the night. No doubt he'd wake up at 12:30 and the whole family in the house he's sleeping at would go, I've got to take you home. So Stepladders are a creative way to move children forward. And what's going to happen is the alarm's going to go off. They're not even going to school. And the body will experience the anxiety. If it's a little person who's having a bit of trouble, maybe there's a change of teacher in the kinder. Maybe the prep class is going through some adjustments, or there's something about school that's not quite right. They can't go. School refusal is a huge challenge. But recognizing that with each step, there's going to be those feelings. And when we put things into place to help settle those feelings down, then we can cope with that. And then we can take the next step. The feelings will come and we just keep moving forward. So what can we do about it? This is such an important takeaway. When emotions are high, when anxiety is high, what we want is for kids to get out of their head and into their body. My kids have used my balloons. I only have 3 left, but I'm going to ask 3 people. Could you please do one? If you don't mind, are you okay to blow up a balloon? And could you please blow up a balloon? Tied off, so we're COVID safe. I did this in a school last week, and oh my goodness. I mean, I said that, but of course, do you know what they love to do? Blow them all up and then just let them fly COVID germs all over the whole auditorium. So one of the things that we can do in homes, in classrooms, this is really simple, cheap, effective, and helps to move anxious kids out of their head and into their body, is to get a balloon. When it's tied off, can you please throw it at me, to me, over this way? Yep, is whack it, go for it. Okay, start hitting it to one another now. Spread it around. Okay. Oops. Hit it backwards, hit it across. No more for me. That's it. Give it a whack. I've only got 3. I'm going to also give a few people some things. Oh, I am so sorry. Oh, so sorry. Okay. I'll make sure I won't hit anyone this time. Okay. Up the back. Do you want to see if you can catch it? Okay. Right at the back. So out of their head and into their body. This one's heavy. Oh, here you go. That one's unexpectedly heavy. Out of their head and into their body can be done in lots of ways. This one's very sad. What a catch. Here we go. So when we have big emotions, this is the thing to remember. How do we get kids out of their head and into their body? Using their senses is a beautiful way to do it. Using their senses. So I have one of these at home for my children, but I don't really need it anymore because they've worked out what their thing is. When it's time to get out of their head and into their body, they know, and it's usually catch. But I filled 2 buckets with sensory items because not that this would be relaxing for anyone, I am sure. Seriously. But that you can understand, maybe, a little kid, it drives me insane, but a little one might really enjoy the mindful action of something like this. And all of a sudden, guess what they're not thinking about? Their worries. Guess what they're not focusing on? Their tummy. Out of their head and into their body through sounds, through catching and throwing in something that's tactile, maybe through a hot chocolate, maybe through playing some music. One of the big things that we can do when it comes to anxiety is breathing. For little kids, these are amazing. I'm going to do this in a very COVID safe way. When we come to breathing, what's not well known is that when we breathe in, there's a slight change in our heart rate. When we breathe out, there's a slight change. When we breathe in,
Attention,
gets a little
please,
bit
visitors.
faster.
The library will be closing in 5 minutes. If you wish to borrow any items, please do so now.
When we breathe in, our heart rate gets just a little bit faster, just a little bit. When we breathe out, it slows down. So we want a long exhale. What's better for a long exhale than a pinwheel or blowing up a balloon or getting down? One of the things I've done at home before too is get a ping pong ball. You wouldn't do this unless you're in a family, not at school probably, but blow a ping pong ball across a big island bench because it's a fun way to get the breath, and that settles down the whole alarm system through activation of the vagus nerve. So out of your head and into your body is the takeaway for this section. It's when we need to settle anxiety, we need to show the brain we're safe. Get kids to show their brain they're safe. Breathing, using their senses, and they're going to find their thing. For my son, who's now 14, we have a round ball that is made of this same stuff, and we'll go outside, and if it's really big feelings, then we'll absolutely like launch it at one another. And you go a good distance so you can have a really big throw and you're not going to smack anybody in the head like I nearly did before. Sorry. For our daughter, just last night, she was completely overwhelmed. I was doing a presentation. I was looking at the clock. I hadn't done hair or makeup. I hadn't done dinner. My husband's been away. And I was looking at the clock thinking, oh my goodness, I really need to get organised. And she's bawling. So I was just thinking, right, focus on what you can control, lots of empathy, really listen, let it settle. But then there's a time at which if you keep wallowing and re-triggering the emotions, you keep sitting in it, then it can really get in the way of doing what's important. So I picked up her teddy and I said, catch. And then she threw it back and we ended up in this big game of catch, and it shifts things. Did you notice how things shifted when you were belting balloons around and catching toys? Out of your head and into your body, just help them work out what it is for them. And then you don't have to buy everything like I did, but of course I can share it with people like yourselves. So where to next? Let's have a look at a summary. I said to you at the start I wanted to share 4 key takeaways. I hope I've done a good job of helping you understand what's happening with anxiety in the body, what is the best way to respond, lots of empathy. When it comes to avoidance, little steps forward, sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, that's okay. And dialing down anxiety symptoms, we know what to do. So I wonder, I'm here as long as you'd like to ask me questions. I wonder if perhaps there might be some questions now, and then I'd like to share some resources with you before we finish, but feel free to talk to me individually afterwards as well. Yes, yeah. I can answer questions in general terms, not obviously not specifics, because I won't know your whole situation. Would you prefer to talk to me later if you've got any questions? No general questions? No? Okay. So when it comes to resources, we're very, very lucky in that we have a lot of resources available, but some are under a lot of pressure. It's probably a good way to put it. Seeing a psychologist can be life-changing, but at the moment there is a little wait for some. So if you think that that might be something that you and your family might need help with, don't hesitate to start the ball rolling, get to the GP, get an appointment, and keep working on some strategies that will support your child and support you and get your support for yourself as well. The GP is really great. Sometimes they'll say it's developmental, or they'll say this is a very normal response in light of the circumstances that your family is in at the moment. Overwhelming grief can feel just so overwhelming. You can be overcome with it. It's very natural if you've lost somebody close to you. It's a very natural response. It's not anything to pathologize. And so the GP is a really great first port of call. Parent line, please reach out to Parent Line if you'd like some counselling over the phone on the spot. Well, you might have to wait 10 minutes in a queue, but I did this not that long ago because I couldn't even tell you now. Oh, yes, I could. but I won't because we don't have time. But I was so overwhelmed with stress and emotion. Our daughter had, I've got a very trigger happy startle reflex, you've just noticed. Yes, I needed someone to talk to. I needed someone to talk to, and I don't have a psychologist anymore because I haven't really needed one, and my beautiful psychologist retired. So Parent Line is amazing if you need help with behavioural stuff in the house or you need a bit of counselling.
Attention please visitors, the library is now closed. Please make your way to the exit doors. The library is now closed.
She says that so beautifully. She does such a nice job. Of course, when it comes to anxiety, it's about getting support. And I'm going to, there are a lot of resources available for you, which I've just shared. I'd like to think that I'm a resource for you. I created the podcast so that there's free, high quality, trustworthy support for anyone who is wanting to learn more about anxiety. And I called it, well, hello anxiety, because we're not turning away and running. We're not avoiding, we're turning around and saying, well, hello anxiety, you and me, we're doing life together. You're in the boot and I'm in the driver's seat. So feel free to tune into that. Of course, there's the books. And on my website, I have a free mini course. If you wanted to subscribe, there's a free Calm Your Anxious Brain mini course. There's strategies there that I haven't shared tonight as well. And yes, they are. Yes. Oh, absolute pleasure. Yes. Oh, I love libraries so much. In fact, I wrote a lot of anxious kids in our local library down on the Mornington Peninsula because I just needed a change of space. So libraries are very special. And I've gifted a couple of extra copies today as well. So there's more for borrowing. Just to finish off, I just wanted to say that, I said it at the start, it's overwhelming if you walk away and you feel like, I don't know what to do first. I don't know where to start. So I wanted to share this quote with you. Small hinges swing big doors. Start small. Don't do too much. Choose one thing. Just choose one thing that you'd like to start with. It might be, I'm going to respond with empathy. I'm going to focus on responding with empathy and giving my child the space and opportunity to just experience how they feel. You might think, do you know what? I'm going to get myself a few little sensory toys and we're going to start to work out how we can get out of our heads and into our bodies. You might start with a little bit of education with your child, age appropriate. It might be, did you know that there's a part of your brain that always tries to keep you safe? Sometimes it's a bit overprotective, okay? And that a little bit of education around anxiety, oh, that feeling, oh, you're feeling anxiety, name it to tame it. It's a normal human emotion. And of course, to know that some of you might think, do you know what, after tonight, I think I might go and have that conversation with my GP. And that puts you on a beautiful pathway to the help that will make such a difference. So I want you to really think about what's that one thing that you're going to start with. And thank you very, very much for coming and joining me here tonight. And a huge thank you to Leanne for organising tonight's event and to the library for having me. It's just been such a pleasure. So thank you. All right, who wants to throw things at me, to me? All right. Woo! Okay. Let's maybe walk them down when you're ready. Oh.